Silas Rourke stepped onto the porch and leveled the 12-gauge calmly. 3 black SUVs rolled to the fence like they owned the ridge. His 8-year-old, Wren, pressed her forehead to the window glass behind him. "Get off my property," he said, not shouting, just making the mountain say it with him. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." The driver of the lead SUV opened his door 2 inches without stepping out, the rehearsed angle of someone who has had guns pointed at him before. A laminated credential flashed in his fingers, some corporate emblem ringed with Latin as if it were a government seal. "Mr. Rourke, we're here under authority of Apex Terra Holdings to serve notice and conduct site access according to the signed easement." Silas's thumb lay across the safety, not touching it, the way his old platoon sergeant used to keep a hand on a sleeping dog's ribs. "I didn't sign an easement. The county clerk didn't record one. And your paperwork isn't a warrant." He watched the man's jawline, not the swinging credential. Muscle twitched once, then stilled. The road ran along a shale shelf cut into the hill, just wide enough for a ranch truck and a prayer. 50 yards downslope, the creek knifed through boulders and alder. 50 yards upslope, timber rose, old pine and Douglas fir linked by lichen the color of old coins. Everything in Silas knew the slope lines, wind channels through the trees, rocks slew under tires, the way sound slid toward the water at dusk and made men half a second late to everything. He took 1 step down, off the porch. "Keep doors closed. Hands on the wheel. You are trespassing, and I am informing you explicitly." His tone was courthouse polite, but his eyes were measuring and filing and marking ranges the way he had in Hellman when irrigation ditches meant cover or drowning. "Let's not escalate," said the driver. He eased his hand toward the door panel. The lock thunked. Silas's shotgun dipped a degree to make the point. "We've got kids in there," the man added with a flick at the cabin window. "Nobody wants a scene." "You made a scene when your choppers hammered my roof with downdraft last week," Silas said. "When your drone buzzed my field like a yellow jacket. When your lawyer left a forged easement on my gate." He let the words be the only heat. Marines were taught to pace their fire. Fathers learn that too, or their words burn their kids. Behind him, Wren whispered, "Dad." He didn't turn. "Back away from the glass, Bird." Her footsteps padded across old pine planks. The sound went through him like a needle, stitching torn pieces into a single purpose. He had done difficult things in far countries, and the world had given him a medal and a folded flag for one of them. But nothing had given him a manual for fathering a brilliant, stubborn kid on a mountain while a billionaire's reach tried to pull the ground out from under them. The passenger door of the second SUV cracked. A man with a shaved head and an earpiece slid out, palms open, then made the first mistake of the morning, a small pivot of the hips that wasn't surrender, alignment to target. Silas saw the concealed holster print against the shirt. Private military contractor posture, not county security. He cataloged the rest: kneecap scar, heavy watch to clock breaching sequences, shoe soles with shale dust, no city rent cop. "Holster stays closed," Silas said. "You turn that grip into daylight and gravity'll do the rest of this conversation." "Understood," shaved head said, but his eyes were already counting bodies. Through the tinted glass, silhouettes. 3 per vehicle plus driver, maybe a 5th in the rear. 16 men unless the third SUV was a comms van. They carried the air of people who think they have more law than the law. Silas took a breath, felt the mountain give it back. "Don't let them write the tempo. We're going to do 3 things," he said, keeping his voice conversational so Wren would hear rhythm instead of fear. 1. You show me the judge's signature. 2. Your men step off the easement they think they have and back onto county road right-of-way. 3. Someone tells Mr. Vale that if he wants to talk about water rights and mineral leverage, he can bring a thermos and knock like a neighbor. "Mr. Vale doesn't knock," the driver said, with a little smile that wanted to be cruel and came out tired. "He acquires. Then he's going to learn how hard this mountain is to swallow." Shaved head nodded once toward the trees. A 4th SUV eased from the bend, big tires whispering, windows dark as lake ice. The convoy had approached in 3, but there were 4. A rule: assume you've missed someone. Silas adjusted his stance a thumb's width and felt a small muscle in his back unclench. A drone rose from behind the last vehicle, electric whine barely above the creek's voice. It floated to fence height and tilted like a curious bird. Wren would have watched it a second before naming it. She named everything. Silas raised the shotgun, then switched direction at the last instant and thumbed the remote clipped beneath the railing, his little concession to progress. Out by the gate, the post light that had never worked in the 5 years they'd lived here flicked on. Stupid thing to notice at 8 in the morning, men on his land, but they watched where he looked. He let them. The drone's feed would bloom with a flare of white as the post light's hidden IR floodlit, saturating their sensors. The drone tottered. Its operator overcorrected, and the little craft pitched into the barbed wire and hung there, whining like trapped anger. Electronics seem jumpy up here, Silas said. Must be the granite. The third SUV's rear door opened. A woman stepped out, late 30s, hair in a severe twist, suit pants neatly hemmed for field work, too nice to ruin, which meant she assumed she wouldn't have to kneel in dust. Mr. Rourke, I'm Claire Lemaine, counsel for Apex Terra. We're not here to hurt anyone. We have an emergency injunction based on public safety. Your property abuts a geologic shear that is going to fail. Our client is willing to buy out your parcel at well over market to ensure evacuation before the event. Silas kept the muzzle slightly low and the corners of his attention high. Geologic shear started failing the minute your crews dynamited a test shaft across my creek. I told your geologist he'd see water climb if he drilled wrong. He laughed. That was the day my well dropped 2 feet. If a failure occurs, you and your child could die, Claire said, as if road reading his heart was a power her diploma conferred. He felt the ache there because it was real. He was not immune to fear, he had merely learned to speak it a different way. If you wanted a safe, you'd have sent the county with a proper evacuation order, not a private army with a drone and a gloss print map. He saw it then, the small tick at the edge of her eye. Something she knew but wasn't allowed to say. Maybe Vale hadn't told his counsel the plan, or maybe she had daughters and had asked for a kinder way. She hesitated long enough for radio static to crackle into the air like a mistake. Shaved head touched his ear and angled his jaw to catch a whisper. Silas didn't need the words. He felt the shift. The command van, yes, the 4th SUV, had decided to move to Phase 2. They'll try to split me from the house. Silas took 2 steps down the path, out from the overhang of the porch roof. This is your last clear statement, he said, amplifying so the timbers would throw his voice wide. You are trespassing. You are not officers of the law. If you attempt to breach my gate, you will be detained by the least harmful means necessary and turned over to the sheriff. That's not how it works, Shaved Head said, but the little angle his hips took said he believed him. Private security men know there's always someone who knows where their joints end and their pain begins. Silas set the shotgun against the rail and slid his left hand into the pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a roll of pale yellow nylon line. He let it dangle. You sent men to a Marine's fence, he said, almost apologetic. Didn't your risk guy talk to any farm kids? We tie knots before we walk. He flicked his wrist. The line arced, dropped exactly where he wanted, and lodged just under the leading SUV's front tire. He didn't pull it tight. He smiled instead and waited. Men who feel mocked commit the next mistake for you. The driver glanced down, chose pride, and rolled forward 6 inches to crush the line. Under the bumper, something pinged like a fork struck on the lip of a jar. All 4 vehicles went still, even the wind seemed to pause. Silas took the slack and gave one smooth tug. The caltrop chain he'd welded on the workbench sang up into the tire like a happy fish finding the surface. Air went out in a single grateful sigh. The SUV sagged, rim biting gravel. Nobody moved. Then radios rose to ears everywhere, and the road filled with men getting out anyway because orders make noise harder to hear. Bird, Silas called without turning. Go to the pantry. Pull the red cord. Inside, A tiny pause, then the clack of a pole. The yard's perimeter posts hummed, then snapped alive with a sound like static. The top strand of barbed wire wasn't barbed. It was poly tape. Livestock knew what that meant. So would men, in about 3 seconds. Shaved head pointed 2 fingers, then chopped. 2 men jogged along the fence line to the old gate by the alder. One reached, wrapped a knuckle around the tape to lift it, and electricity slapped him under the fingernail and up through memory. He yelped and rolled into the grass. The second man froze, learned from the first, then swung a boot to pin the tape without touching it. He grinned at Silas. Asterisk smart. Good, asterisk. He jerked the tape down with the boot and made a space big enough to duck under. We're in, he barked. He was, until the creak decided to remind him of geometry. Silas had anchored the lower wire to a telescoping post set into the bank at a quiet pool. He tapped a second remote under the rail. The post released. The lower wire snapped up through the water and cracked against the man's forearm, a little kiss from the creek that made every nerve argue about who was in charge. He went down with a splash and a sound that would have been funny if people hadn't been watching with hands near guns. Claire said something fast into her radio. The convoy's 4th vehicle, yes, the comms node, revved and reversed. It slid right rear wheel into the shallow ditch that always looked dry and always wasn't. Shale under the wheel face turned to soap. The tire spun. Mud spattered the suit pants. Claire stepped back exactly in time, proof of a mind that had memorized non-embarrassment. Silas breathed, slow. Keep them making decisions in your terrain and they'll supply their own gravity. Sir. A voice from the side path. Old neighbors didn't call out like that. This one did, strained formal, trying to sound official the way a substitute teacher tries on authority the first day. Deputy Uriah Bellamy rounded the bend on foot, hat in his hand from the trot, cheeks red more from nerves than effort. He wasn't alone. The county sheriff, Thad Matters, walked behind him, broad, careful, the hat built into his skull the way a tree branch grows a knot you can't sand out later. Thad's presence changed something essential. He wasn't for sale. If he had been, Vale would have bought him already. The sheriffs up here were like granite, they cracked only along their oldest lines. Morning, Silas, Thad said, and the men by the SUVs stood up straighter for reasons they would not admit. We got calls about a disturbance. Apex Terrace men are trespassing and attempting to serve corporate paperwork as if it were court process, Silas said. They've resisted my request to leave. They've interfered with my fence and attempted to breach. He said it as if reciting a report to an officer he respected, because he was. Thad had once sat with Wren on the courthouse steps and taught her how to fold an old county fair map into a swan. That meant something in a place where weather wrote in longhand on bones. Claire stepped forward, voice brisk. Sheriff, we have an emergency injunction based on geologic risk. We're attempting to evacuate Mr. Rourke from a hazard zone. He's obstructing. Thad took the paper without looking at her and read it the way men who weren't lawyers read everything, twice slowly, once fast. He angled the page to catch the faint watermark every county order had worn since 1978. The paper was good. The signature below it, though, Thad's mouth made a shape that meant he had seen her kind of forgery before. This is a draft. It is not a signed order, Thad said. He tapped the bottom with a blunt forefinger. Judge's name with a stamp. Clerk's signature missing. And you don't get to enforce county orders with private personnel even if it were signed. Claire's jaw flexed. We were told the signed version would be transmitted en route. And it wasn't, Thad said. He handed the paper back. So here's what's about to happen. You and your men are going to back your vehicles to county right-of-way and wait there civilly. You are not going to touch Mr. Rourke's fence again. You are not going to fly toys over his land. I'm going to call Judge Polson and find out what kind of emergency this is and whether it exists at all. If there's a real risk, we'll manage it under law. If there isn't, you'll be driving back down this hill without a drone to your name. Silas let his breath out for the count of 4. The count tasted like cedar and the memory of Chow Hall coffee. Thank you, Thad. A chop of wind arrived incongruously, like the smell of salt inland. Then the sound came, rotor wash beating the ridge flat. The men by the SUVs all looked up instinctively as the tail boom cleared the trees. The helicopter dropped into a hover above the gravel turnout beyond the alder, pilot sliding the bubble between branches like someone threading a needle over a sleeping child. They had brought the owner of the word acquire. The helicopter's skids kissed rock. Dust rose. A man stepped down with the unlikely grace of someone who had trained his personal trainer to teach him a dangerous hobby, rope work, maybe, cliffs in Utah, a curated list of fears to conquer. He wore a field jacket that had never seen field and boots that wanted to be scuffed but weren't allowed to be. Dorian Vale looked smaller in person than in magazine covers, as if the photographs always needed a little more threat to fill the frame. But his eyes had the clarity of wealth that had not been told no very often. He didn't look at the sheriff. He looked at Silas. His expression was plausible friendliness baked onto something harder. "Mr. Rourke," he said, voice amplified by money instead of electronics. "Mercy me, what a view. I see why you're attached to it. I'm attached too. Consider me a future neighbor." Silas didn't step down to offer a hand. "Neighbors knock," he said, and watched Vale file the line under quaint/hard. Vale spread his hands. "I came personally because the lawyers make things ugly. I dislike ugly. I build beautiful things. You, I'm told, served. I respect that. Let's show your daughter what respect looks like." The angle of his chin found the cabin window, because of course he knew she was there. Silas felt his back tense. "Leave her out of your sentence. Children are the heart of the matter," Vale said mildly. "The shear line under this ridge is unstable. When it goes, and it will, your cabin will be the first thing that slides. I have engineers with models that would make you weep for how inevitable they are. Come down off the ridge today, take a check that changes your life, and bring your daughter to a house where the floor has no doubt built into it. Or stand there and tell me a Marine will gamble his child's life on stubbornness." Thad's voice cut across before Silas's could. "Mr. Vale, step back to county right-of-way," he said. "The conversation is under my authority now." Vale turned his head, and for the first time, looked at the sheriff the way a man looks at a machine he has not decided whether to buy or break. "Sheriff matters," he said, with good taste enough to put the title first. "Grateful you're here. I prefer when outcomes have signatures." "Then wait for one," Thad said. He didn't smile. Men like him didn't, because they didn't need to show their teeth to remind wolves that they had them. The helicopter remained, its rotor wash worrying the alder leaves backwards and forwards like someone thinking with their hands. Wren's small face was a pale square in the window again. Silas could feel the heat of her worry like sunlight on skin. He wanted her away from glass, away from hearing how the world tried to play dad like a chess piece. Vale shifted, small, and touched his collar, not adjustment, signal. Two men at the fourth vehicle emerged with a hard rectangular case between them like a folded coffin's lid. They set it on the gravel turnout and popped the latches. Inside, a portable ground-penetrating radar rig, the kind road crews used and wealthier trespassers loved. "Let us scan the subsurface at the fence," Vale said. "If it reads what I think, you'll move without me saying more." "No," Silas said. "You scan, you claim the result in the press and in court. You put my name in a sentence with danger and call me selfish. You already hired a photographer." He tilted his chin toward the tree line where a long lens made itself small and failed. Vale didn't turn. He smiled faintly. "Mr. Rourke," Claire said, "lower now, less lawyer and more person under it, if there is risk." "Then the county will manage it under law," Thad finished. "Not under press release." Radio static skittered again, small insects of sound, and then coherence, Delta 2, go now. The words were not county channel. Vale didn't flinch, which meant he had been told to expect a noise like that and pretend not to hear it. Shaved head moved. Two more men flowed out of shadows that shouldn't have held men, down by the creek footbridge. Silas swore without sound. They tried the flank anyway. Deputy, Thad said without looking away from Vale. Walk with me. He and Uriah moved toward the footbridge at a pace you could call slow if you wanted to be wrong. 2 steps later, Silas was moving too, shotgun loose, barrel down. He didn't cut in front of Thad. He matched him at a diagonal. Men who'd carried weight together didn't need to rehearse. The 2 apex contractors at the bridge looked up as if they'd discovered a new species of consequence. One put his palms up. The other, quicker and more frightened than he understood, went for something on his vest. Thad's hand moved, the man saw the gesture and aborted, as if the sheriff's palm were gravity. Set it on the boards, Thad said. A small black unit clicked as it touched wood. Back away. Motion sensor, Uriah reported. Tripwire capable. Tripwire on my bridge, Silas said, and let himself taste the anger for exactly 1 second before he corked it again. Mr. Vale. Thad barked over his shoulder. Call your dogs or I leash them. Vale's mouth made a shape like TSK, but then he gestured with 2 fingers. Heads dipped at radios. A few of the men lowered their shoulders as if someone had taken a backpack off them. The motion sensor stayed on the boards, little red LED pulsing like news that never quieted. Sheriff, Claire said, we're trying to prevent harm. She swallowed. We were told Mr. Rourke might be volatile. I'm volatile when I'm lied to, Silas said, and wished he hadn't dignified it with a reply. The mountain breathed. Clouds were late to move, and the lights slid behind and in front of the alder leaves with each rotor beat. Wren was not at the window anymore, and the sudden absence of her small square of face was an ache worse than any of this posturing. He turned. He didn't run. He walked because running was contagious and men with triggers were watching. He opened the cabin door and called, Bird? His voice went wrong, he tasted it, too much gravel. In here, she answered from the pantry. He found her on the little step stool, hands still looped in the red cord that ran along the top shelf to the inverter cutoff in the fence transformer. Her hair was past her shoulders and trying to become its own weather. She had her mother's eyes and Silas's inconvenient refusal to be impressed by adult nonsense. Stay in the pantry, he said. Headphones on. Book. If anyone but me opens this door, you scream Thad's name so loud it breaks the jars. You understand? She nodded. She did not ask questions. He hoped the world never taught her that obedience could be a betrayal of the self. He kissed her forehead and stepped back into the day because the day had required him. When he returned to the porch, Thad stood where Silas had stood, on the second step, hat low, not to shade his eyes but to hide where they were pointed. Vale had put his hands in his jacket pockets, which, among men, was theater for I am comfortable here. Mr. Vale, Thad said. This ridge is going to be peaceful today. It's going to stay that way because you're going to do exactly what I said while we wait for Judge Polson to tell us what the law is. Vale smiled like a man reading a menu he had ordered from before. Sheriff, he said. Of course. He stepped backward, 2 exact steps, then turned toward his helicopter as if the matter had been settled in a way that pleased him. The rotor wash kicked up small pebbles that pinged on Silas's porch rail like soft hail. Vale climbed aboard and put a headset on without ducking his head. The helicopter lifted, nose dipping toward the valley. Shaved Head counted his men with an eye sweep, then started waving vehicles to reverse. One by one, the SUVs rocked back and jockeyed, patience fraying and returning like a bad song. Silas watched them until they'd cleared the fence line. Then he let himself breathe the way he only did after he'd threaded a door that had been charged to blow, slow, and with gratitude. Stay near the house, Thad said. I'm going to call the judge. He tipped his chin at Uriah. Watch the turnout. They were still rearranging themselves down on the county shoulder when Silas heard the one sound he had not wanted, 2 quick snaps like someone cracking knuckles near steel. He didn't look at the fence. He looked at the trees above the turnout and saw the shimmer, just a lacuna in the green, wrong in a way a man's eye learns if he has had to find snipers in buildings that once were schools. Thad, he said, low. The first round took the top strand of poly tape. The second round took the porch post above Silas's shoulder and made toothpicks of 2 inches of cedar. Uriah yelped and crouched. The men who'd started to feel civil went flat like puppets whose strings had been cut. The third round punched gravel between Thad's boots. Silas didn't dive, he stepped into the cabin because his child was there. He grabbed the plate carrier that hung on the inside knob, shoved it across his chest, and snapped it like muscle memory had been waiting to be asked. The 12 gauge was on the porch, the 5.56 ranch rifle was behind the door. He took it in a bandolier and stepped back out. "Contact!" Uriah shouted, and then, bless him, shut up and listened. "Single shooter," Silas called. "High on the left. Wind from the creek." Using rotor wash lull to mask the report. "He's not with the convoy, he's overwatch they thought they wouldn't need." "Deputy," Thad said, "smoke." Uriah tossed 2 canisters toward the turnout, gray billowing low and quick, a soft wall built of chalk and time. Silas walked into the yard and became smaller than the world. He moved not like a hero but like a man who knew a bullet does not negotiate. He put the rifle to his shoulder and waited for the shimmer to move again. Don't shoot at ghosts. Make him shoot. Make him aim at nothing and give you the line to aim at something. He lifted his left hand and held it high, fingers spread. The shimmer hiccuped as the shooter's eyes went to the only deliberate motion on the hill. Silas dropped his hand. The fourth round came an inch to the right of where the hand had been, the shooter adjusting left to lead motion. Silas mapped the hit line backward to the tree line, picked a wedge of shadow, and pressed the trigger 1 clean time. He didn't need to hit the man. He needed to hit the branch that held his angle. Would spat leaves. The shimmer moved too fast, panic, not plan. Thad's second smoke canister tumbled and hissed. Uriah fired low into the slope to encourage a retreat that wouldn't become a last stand. A shape slithered through brush, then dropped out of sight toward the creek with the graceless grace of someone who had just remembered an appointment elsewhere. Silas listened. The sound of someone falling badly down a gully is universal. He didn't need to go confirm. He needed to keep the day from growing more hands than he had to hold them with. Thad's radio growled. "Judge Polson," he said, and moved a little away, but not out of sight, because courts were honorable and helicopters didn't like to be left alone with hills. Silas walked the fence slowly, the rifle low, until he could see the turnout clearly again. Claire stood with her hands crossed at her wrist like she was on a field trip to a place she had not expected to visit. Shaved head had a phone to his ear and a fury in his posture that wasn't for show. The SUVs idled. The helicopter circled low in the valley and then climbed, as if Vale were reminding everyone whose name paid for gravity's brief exceptions. "Mr. Rourke," Claire called through the fading smoke. "This is not what we wanted." "I believe that," Silas said. "I don't believe it matters." She nodded a little, which was human. "I'm sorry you were shot at." He could have said something about how apology tastes different depending on who has a rifle, but he didn't. "Go back down the hill, Ms. Lemaine," he said. "Tell whoever tells you what to do that he's playing with matches in a dry year." She looked at Thad, who was still on the radio, hat low for the judge's words and for the sun. Then she got into the second SUV and shut the door as if sealing herself in a jar. The convoy backed and turned and began its descent. Uriah stood breathing hard, hands shaking a little, eyes bright. He was young enough for fear to feel like a thing you could fix with push UPS. He wouldn't always be. Thad came back to the porch. "Polson will fax a hold," he said. "No one touches this ridge without county approval. He'll send a geologist we've used before to look at the shear this afternoon. A real one." He looked at the tree line. "I'll have Boyd check the gully. If your shooter broke his leg, he can think about his decisions while he waits." Silas nodded. He couldn't feel his hands. It took a breath, then two, for the sensation to come back and bring pins with it. "Ren okay?" Thad asked. "In the pantry, mad at the world for knocking," Silas said. He almost smiled and didn't. "Keep her mad," Thad said. "It's a good muscle." He tipped his hat. I'll be back with Boyd and the geologist. He and Uriah walked toward the bend at a pace that said the day had not finished speaking. The mountain exhaled. The creek resumed its place in the sentence. The helicopter's thump sank toward the highway and became rumor. Silas stood very still until his heart believed all that, then he turned and went inside. Wren had not put her headphones on. She had a copy of The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind open to the photograph of the windmill built from scrap. Her small finger touched the picture like it could catch current from it. "You okay, Bird?" he asked. "They shot at the house," she said. "At a post," he said. "Not at you." "That's in front of me," she said, with the brutal logic of childhood. He nodded. "It is." He looked at the cracked sliver of cedar fallen to the floor and felt every year of his life stand up again like men answering their names. "Come help me pick up the pieces," he said, and she got down and did. They were setting the splintered shards into a cardboard box when the phone in his pocket buzzed with a number he didn't have and already knew. He let it buzz twice, then answered and said nothing. "Beautiful place," Dorian Vale said. The helicopter rotors were gone, so the sound in his voice was any other sound. "I wanted you to see my face when I asked. Now I want you to hear my voice when I tell." "You hired a shooter," Silas said. "He fell into my gully." "I hired men who make imperfect decisions under stress," Vale said. "I like stress. It reveals whether the world will bend or break." "You won't bend." "Good. I adjust. I find breakpoints elsewhere." Silas felt his muscles prepare to misunderstand. "Say the thing you called to say." Vale obliged. "You left the Corps because you could not tolerate certain orders. You came to a ridge because land understands men like you. It holds you without asking your resume. But ridges stand atop other people's maps, and those maps include lines we draw with courts and contracts and extraction permits. I can move lines. You can fire warning shots. We are both, in our ways, artists. Let us not pretend we aren't." "I'll say it slower since you like performance," Silas said. "Stay off my land. Keep your men off my bridge. Bring a warrant or a pie, nothing in between." Vale chuckled softly, like someone enjoying mercy. "Do you know what an MFL is, Mr. Rourke?" Silas closed his eyes. Minimum flow level. The county's new darling regulation meant to keep creeks alive. It also meant a lever if someone downstream owned a valve disguised as a mining claim. "I bought the water company that services your nearest neighbor," Vale said. "I'm not coming over your fence again. I'm going to turn the valley into needing me. Then I'm going to watch the law you love will itself to your door and politely lift you off your porch. I'll never have to raise my voice." The quiet after that sentence wasn't silence. It was a type of weather. Silas understood weather. He also understood that some storms took days to arrive after you heard the first shoreward sound. "You built yourself into a god in your head," Silas said. "That's lonely work." "Lonely men build the future," Vale said. "Fathers are only lonely when they mistake walls for shelter." The line clicked dead. Wren watched his face. "Was that the man?" "Yes." "Does he get to say the creek is his?" "No." He put the phone on the table as if setting a dangerous thing down away from children. "But he gets to make people think it for a while." She nodded as if this were the sadness of the world she'd expected to learn eventually. "Can we go check the trout?" "We can," he said, because making sure life went on was sometimes the only ritual that mattered. They walked to the footbridge together, past the black unit still blinking on the boards, which Thad hadn't collected yet, or maybe had asked Boyd to photograph first. The creek ran with its usual arrogance, ignoring men and their devices. In the pool by the alder roots, 2 brown trout hung in water like they'd been pinned by invisible hands. Wren crouched and watched their dorsal fins adjust to tiny changes like listening. "You're mad," she said. "I'm thinking," he answered, which was often the same thing pointed in a different direction. "Does thinking include knots?" she asked, meaning the nylon line and its satisfaction. He smiled a little. "Always." They stayed there until the light moved 2 inches along the alder bark, then walked back to the cabin because the world had not ended, and the day had chores that were owed. Thad returned after lunch with a geologist in tow, a narrow man with boots older than Claire's entire career and a face like the ridge had carved it by hand. He introduced himself as Amos Fielding and looked at the creek like it had said something smart. He wore no company logo. He wrote in a small notebook with a pencil that had been sharpened with a knife. "Show me where the test shaft was," Amos said. Silas took him. They walked contours the way men walk sentences when they care about meaning more than speed. Amos listened to the ground with a bar and hit rock the way a doctor taps bones, not to hurt but to learn what hurts. He traced a line with his toe from the shaft head toward the Rourke porch and nodded once. "Your man's right," Amos told Thad. "Their bore nicked the water table where the fault rubs. It'll weep. It won't give. This hill will stand another century if men stop poking it with clever." Thad grunted. "I'll write it that way in English." "Write that they owe him a well," Amos said. "And quit. And don't come back lest they bring cake and shame." Silas felt the strange, unhelpful lift of hope. He had learned not to fall in love with good sentences while men with money still had time to write replies. Uriah came up the path at a jog. "Sheriff. The gully's empty." "What do you mean, empty?" Thad asked. "No blood, no scuffs past the first slide, nothing." "Dude fell right then vanished," Uriah said. "Boyd walked the downstream banks 200 yards. Nothing. Like someone was waiting at the bottom." Silas's skin chilled the way it had once in a desert when he'd tasted distance and realized it was alive. Asterisk, they had extraction at the creek. "Of course they did, asterisk." Thad turned his hat in his hands once, just once, and set it back. "We're going to lock this down tight," he said. "Amos, write me a paragraph and your phone number." "Uriah, you're here till night." "Silas, keep it calm. No hero moves. They're trying to make you their headline." Silas nodded. He cleaned the porch with Wren, swept the cedar splinters into their box, and set the box on the workbench next to the caltrop chain with a label, asterisk fix post. "Don't forget why, asterisk." He checked the fences. He put out extra feed. He did not pretend any of that would matter if men decided to turn maps into laws at a rate he couldn't match. But he also did not surrender the slow rhythm that had kept him human. Twilight arrived honest and cool. The ridge pinked like a shame that would not admit it. Silas cooked eggs and potatoes, and Wren drowned them in salsa the color of bravery. They read 2 chapters of the book about wind and wished the author had been their neighbor. He put her to bed in the little room with the quilt she had stitched in bits with the Grange ladies. He sat in the chair by the door for 5 minutes after her breathing changed shape. He did not pray. He did not pray. He listened to the mountain put itself to bed. He was in the kitchen washing the last plate when the inverter light in the pantry clicked twice and then went dark. The refrigerator hummed, then didn't. The cabin held its breath the way a deer holds still, present, not alive. "Power," he said to the air. He went to the pantry. The cutoff had not tripped. The battery bank read full. The lines to the array showed nothing. Something had cut power farther back, where the main feed crossed the service road. He picked up the rifle and a headlamp, then stopped because light teaches people too much. He put the headlamp down and took the smaller flashlight that winked instead of glared. He left the cabin by the back door and walked the angle to the service road the way water would have. Halfway there, the smell reached him. Not ozone, diesel. Not cigarette, chewed mint. He moved slower. The service road curved around a boulder as big as a church answer. He put his shoulder to the stone and looked around with one eye. A truck sat astride the road, blackout shades over the lenses, hood up like a mouth. A man lay under it with his boots out, the soles new and the scuffs added by a brush. 2 more shapes waited out of the flashlight's penumbra, one kneeling like prayer and one standing like a problem. The cable that ran from Silas's array to the inverter had been neatly cut. The ends had been crimped to a device that winked in lime green. Silas took one step back and put his heel on something that moved. Not a branch. A sensor mat. The click was small and total. The kneeling man's head turned. He didn't say now. He didn't need to. The trucks had slammed. Boots scraped. A body moved behind Silas, rising from the low brush where it had been patient. Silas spun, rifle up, but two hands found his barrel the way men who have practiced find it, not grabbing steel but grabbing leverage. The man behind him was big and soft at the edges the way Jim Strong looks under a jacket. Another silhouette rose to his left. The third was up on the boulder, elevation and calm. "Evening, Mr. Rourke," the shape on the rock said. The voice was the shaved head's, stripped of conciliation. "Mr. Vale asked me to apologize for the earlier improvisation. He prefers choreography. Tonight, we do it right." Silas kept the rifle tight to his chest. "My kid is sleeping," he said. "You've made your point." "Not yet," Shaved Head said. "Tonight we take the point and write it down." He flicked the hand. The man at Silas's back twisted. The rifle popped free like a tooth, finally deciding its time had come. Silas let it go because holding it longer meant breaking a finger he needed later. He stepped into the big man's space instead and used the only kindness he had, a palm heel to the jaw hinge that sent nerve lightning down into his knees. The big man grunted, hands groping for a place pain was not. Silas pivoted, grabbed the wrist that still held the rifle like a memory, and levered it the wrong way until it agreed to be empty. He slid his hip and sent the second man into the road dust on the radius of a circle that had been calculated in another country. The third man dropped from the rock and cut a line with something that wasn't a knife but understood stabbing. Silas blocked and felt fabric die against his forearm. He rolled, took the man's ankle, and found in his pocket the muscle he needed to be before Ren had been born. He became him. He became him very fast. He ended on his feet with the rifle in his hands again, barrel down because the boulder would return your bullet if you forgot its temper. "Enough," Shaved Head said. He had a remote in his palm. He lifted his eyebrows like a man about to open an automatic door politely. "You wired your fence pretty. Let me introduce you to a trick I learned on a different property line." He pressed. Down at the cabin, behind Silas through trees and air, a small alarm chirped, high and domestic, the sound a microwave makes when it believes the food is done. It sounded twice. Then the chirp extended into a steady tone that didn't belong to anything in the house. Silas's throat closed. The pantry. The inverter. The red cord. The device on the line. "Don't worry," Shaved Head said. "It's not a bomb. Mr. Vale doesn't bomb children. He relocates them." Silas ran. He left his body behind and ran with something that had nothing to do with muscle. He heard the men give chase because they were tethered to an outcome and couldn't imagine another. He cut the angle, took the draw the deer used, cleared the boulder and the old Ford and hit the yard like an answer that didn't need a question. The cabin door stood open. The pantry light was out. The high tone sang on like a nerve that had decided to make itself a voice. "Ren," he yelled into the little room, and the echo came back to him with no child in it. On the pantry shelf, where the inverter display should have red and green, a small tablet lay. Its screen glowed. A single sentence moved across it like a tide that brought letters instead of water. "Bring the deed to mile marker 14. Come alone. She's safe until 10:00 ****. The seconds in the corner rolled into a countdown that had already begun. Silas's breath broke once in the middle and then went steady again because that is what fathers do when the end of the world schedules itself. He reached for the rifle and reached for the keys and reached for a part of himself he had not touched since he decided love was more dangerous than war because you couldn't train for it, you could only lose to it with honor. He stepped back into the night, and the dark outside moved. A shape peeled from the alder shadow and put its finger to its lips and was not a threat but a message. A neighbor. No. Not a neighbor at all. A woman with a scar half hidden by hair, eyes like someone who had slept in deserts, standing where no one had stood a second ago. Silas Rourke, she whispered. If you go alone, you lose her. If you go with us, you might not. Who are you? He said, and his voice was ice over fire. She tilted her chin toward the creek where the gully thinned into wetness and secrets. People Mr. Vale forgot he hurt, she said. People he didn't buy. You have 7 minutes to decide whether you want to be proud or effective. The countdown read 1 hour 12 minutes and 52 seconds. The knight leaned in to hear his answer. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The knight leaned in to hear his answer. Silas Rourke stared at the glowing countdown, 1 hour 12 minutes and 52 seconds, and at the woman in the alder shadow who said people Mr. Vale forgot he hurt were standing in his yard like a second chance. He wanted to choose the version of himself who could run straight to mile marker 14 and tear the world open with his bare hands. He wanted to choose the version who made good radio for evil men. He breathed once and let that man pass by like a train he would not board. I'm not interested in pride, he said. Talk while we move. The woman nodded and fell in beside him without ceremony, the way pros do. Mara Ibarra, she said. Former Apex Security, before they called it Apex. Before Vale started hiring men who practice apologies more than ethics. I was the one who told him not to drill the creek at the shear. He smiled like gravity was on retainer. Your people? Close, she said. Rook's got your bridge. Hester's watching the service road. The kid, your kid, is in a van with a medic named Ellison who thinks he's a paramedic because he once held pressure on a knife wound while a real nurse worked. He's the softest edge they have and he'll keep her steady because he doesn't know how not to. Silas's heart lurched. You've got eyes? Thermal and ears, Mara said. She tapped a small loop behind her jaw. Their comms are sloppy. Vale hired the kind of men who've never lost their own fight. That's a resume problem when the fight changes. He stopped at the workbench and slid the cardboard box of cedar slivers aside. He reached for the drawer where he kept things that used to belong to other lives, chem light sticks, a roll of mylar, a tube of graphite powder, a deck of marked playing cards he'd used to teach Ren that deception was a tool, not a character trait. He grabbed the roll of mylar and the graphite. He lifted the caltrop chain and slung it over his shoulder like a tuckered snake. You don't have to bring the deed, Mara said, watching him work. I'm not, Silas said. He pulled a thin manila envelope from the shelf and slid a single blank sheet into it. He dusted the inside with graphite, sealed it, and pressed the seam with his thumbnail. But I'm going to let them think their hands are dirty when they touch it. Mara smiled with half her mouth. You're old school. I build fences and people underestimate paper cuts, he said. They move through the cabin like wind with purpose. He checked the pantry again, not because he needed to but because fathers need to. He pocketed the little tablet with the message so he could show it to a judge while the minutes still meant something. He killed the lights with the breaker and let the cabin become another shadow among shadows. Outside, the creek had stiffened into a dark ribbon. Rook emerged from the footbridge angle, slight and angular, with a coil of line around his chest and a satchel that clinked like decisions. 2 shooters set overwatch near the 14 marker, he whispered. One on the cut bank above the signage, one on the old trestle footing. Thermal says both are scanning for a third that isn't there. They're nervous. Someone reported a ghost near the quarry perimeter. That would be me, Hester said, sliding out of the service road brush with the quiet competence of the kind of woman who could disappear in a crowd of trees at noon. She wore carpenter jeans and a jacket that had seen more rain than applause. Your sheriff has ground truth. Vale has ground myth. He's betting men on myth. I don't mind. Silas looked at Mara. What do you need me to be? Bait that doesn't get eaten, she said. And the man who hears the thing everyone else pretends is just wind. I can do those, Silas said. He thought of Ren's finger on the photograph of a windmill and felt something in him decide without asking permission. We move now. They went light and quiet, Silas with the envelope, the caltrop chain looped twice, the rifle on a short sling, Mara with a compact carbine clipped to her chest and a pouch on her hip, Rook with rope and a homemade jammer that looked like something a high school science teacher would confiscate, Hester with bolt cutters and a roll of farmer's wire that could have built a fence or written a poem, depending on who held it. The county road toward 14 ran like a spine along the ridge. The stars were out, sharp and distant, the way mountain stars are on nights when men give them names they don't deserve. They moved off the gravel and onto the duff, putting their feet where the deer did to keep sound the size of a leaf. Silas angled them along a spur that locals used when the main road went slick. "They'll think we'll choose the straight line," he said. "Straight lines belong to men who don't own land with their bodies." They reached a fence corner above the mile marker turnout. Through the black comb of fir branches, Silas could see the glint of headlight glass half buried under camo net, and the low blue of electronics someone had forgotten to tape. Beyond that, the blacker shape of a van. He swallowed, and the swallow tore a thin place in him where his daughter's name lived. "Eyes," Rook breathed, and pointed 2 fingers. The trestle footing, a silhouette barely darker than the dark, a man with a rifle who had never held still long enough to be a tree. Above the marker, the cut bank shooter, feet wider than they should be, weight forward on the outside edges of his boots, compensating for a knee that had once known a different story. "Snipers first," Mara whispered. "Snipers first," Silas agreed, not because he loved that logic but because he wanted to do the thing that saved Wren. He unspooled the mylar and cut 3 crude capes. He and Mara draped them, then covered their heads with loose folds of space blanket that would turn their heat signature into noise. Hester wrapped hers around the jammer and slid it forward like a child offering a magic trick. Rook dropped low and moved left to a place where the ground rose to meet him. Mara touched Silas's sleeve. "He's chewing nicotine gum," she whispered. "How do you?" "The rhythm," she said. "Men lie with their mouths even when they think they're quiet." Silas filed the rhythm, 3 quick bites, pause, 2 slower. He waited for the pause, then shifted his weight exactly when the man's jaw locked. He made the next move on the second slow bite. He felt ridiculous and deadly in tinfoil. He moved like a ghost that had watched movies about ghosts and was trying to be respectful. At the trestle footing, the first shooter lifted his rifle to reset his view. Mara flowed up behind him like a sentence finding its verb. The butt of her carbine touched the man's skull just behind the ear with a gentleness practiced by someone who knew how much not to ruin. He went limp in a way that meant he'd remember his decisions tomorrow. The cut bank shooter hadn't smoked in 2 years but chewed like he did, chasing a memory to keep his hands busy. On the second slow bite, Silas rose just enough to establish a line and whispered, "Left." The man turned his head fractionally toward a whisper that didn't exist. Silas slid his forearm under the rifle and took the man's balance away the way a man takes a tool from a friend before it hurts him. He caught the rifle, snugged it away, and put the man into dirt with a twist that said sleep. The gum fell out and stuck to his cheek as if volunteering an alibi. Hester rolled the jammer forward and clicked it twice. The green LED on the van's dash winked out and then back on, confused. Confusion was good. Confusion kept men from doing what they had practiced. Mara put 2 plastic cuffs on the trestle shooter and left him face down with his hands behind him and his cheek on moss. Silas did the same to the cut bank shooter and pushed the gum aside with 1 finger because he was not mean for fun. 2 down, Rook breathed. "Ground?" Silas nodded toward the van. "Ground." They moved as a line, low and soft along the privilege of shadows. The van's side door faced the ditch. A man leaned there, bored in the way a man gets bored when he wants a job to be over without admitting he wants it because someone might call him soft. He tapped his phone screen and the blue washed his face with a light that made him look 12. Mara rose into that light and put the cold round of a suppressor to his ear. "Shoo," she said, not because he was going to speak, but because he might have considered it. He froze and dropped the phone, which landed on a patch of clover as soft as forgiveness. Silas placed his hand on the van door. He felt the rubber seal and the little stick at the latch where men had closed it fast with the wrong hand. He breathed and let his fingers remember how to open stupidly closed things. He slid the door back an inch. The interior light stayed off because someone had pulled the fuse. A small figure sat belted on the bench seat, hair wild around a face made of more courage than he had deserved to be a father to. A man in a polo with a patch that said MED Tech looked up, eyes wide and apologetic before he'd done anything besides remember he existed. "Ellison," Silas said, in a voice that had learned how to be unafraid for someone else's sake. "I'm taking my daughter home." "I didn't," Ellison said. "I'm here to keep her breathing," Silas said. "You did that. Thank you. Hands where I can see them." Ellison lifted his hands and they trembled like the rest of him. "They said her blood sugar is fine," Silas said. "Because I fed her at 6 and again at 8, and if I had missed, she'd have told me with that look that crushes me, and I'd have made pancakes in the dark." "Hands stay up." "Dad?" Wren's voice was small and furious at once. "They put a band on me." She lifted her wrist. A little black device sat there blinking, more show than teeth. "It's theater," Silas said. He snipped the band with a multi-tool and dropped it into his pocket like a promise to argue later. "Head down. We're going to be quiet 3 more minutes." Mara had the board guard face down now, his phone a blue star in the ditch. Rook slipped around to the van's rear, popped the latch, and whistled softly. "Gifts," he said. 2 rifles, a hard case with cuffs, a coil of zip ties, and a drone in 3 pieces like a puzzle that had forgotten itself. Rook took the drone's camera and slid it into his pocket as if he were rescuing a small animal. Silas lifted Wren into his arms. She wrapped herself around his neck and made a sound that was neither crying nor laughing but the thing children do when the geography resets under their feet and the old map unfolds itself like it hadn't been crumpled by men. "Time on the clock?" he asked, still holding her. 46 minutes, Hester said, squinting at the tablet. "We've got margin." "Margin is a rumor," Mara said. "We exfil now." Silas nodded and then heard it, the sound that wasn't rotor wash or wind or creak. A vehicle approaching slow without lights and with the careful care of someone who believes stealth is effort instead of outcome. "North approach," Rook whispered. "Single truck. Heavy suspension, light load. The kind of truck that thinks it's smarter than dirt." "Vale," Mara said. "He wants to watch the handoff with his own eyes." Silas's arms tightened around Wren in spite of himself. He put her down gently. "Bird, we're going to play the quiet game," he said. "Rule is, you win if you don't let the dark know you're proud." She nodded solemnly. "I'm not proud. I'm mad." "Perfect," he said. "Hold it like a secret." Hester slid Wren toward the brush and wrapped her in mylar, leaving a slit for eyes, creating a lumpy bush that would read on thermal like nothing at all. Ellison stared at the shrinking shape of his own choices and pressed his hands flat against the van's ceiling as if a church had fallen on him and he'd decided to cooperate. The truck rolled into the turnout and idled. The driver door opened and Vale stepped down without looking around first. Men like him do not expect the world to need looking at. He wore the same field jacket as before and the same oblivious belief that night was a stage and he was available for a bow. Behind him, 2 men slid out of the back seat, black cases in hand. A third man got out of the passenger side, shaved head, the one Silas had introduced to his fence. He held a remote like a priest holds a wafer, promise and ritual, not food. "Mr. Rourke," Vale called softly, as if he didn't expect the dark to do anything he hadn't scheduled. "I appreciate punctuality. Where shall we conduct our exchange?" Silas stepped out from the shadow because sometimes a man has to put himself where the story can see him. "County right-of-way," he said, and threw the envelope underhand into the gravel between them so it slid and stopped at the toe of Vale's polished boot. "Your terms said bring the deed. You didn't say hand it over before you proved a life." Vale looked down at the envelope and then back up with an expression that would have made a lesser man want to explain paper to him. "Open it," he told Shaved Head. Shaved Head bent, picked it up, and thumbed the seal. Graphite powder kissed his skin like regret choosing a favorite. He wiped his fingers on his pants with the quick disgust of a man who keeps his hands clean in dirty work. "Where's the girl?" Silas said. Vale gestured lazily, and Shaved Head clicked his remote. The van's dome light bloomed. The side door slid back where Silas had left it carefully ajar. It revealed emptiness and one medical bag with its zipper half closed. "She's nearby," Vale said. "Within the circle of safety my men maintain. 10 minutes after I have what I need, she will be in your arms." Silas's mouth went flat. "Your men don't maintain safety. They maintain your imagination." Vale sighed. "An excellent performance." "Do you know why men like me hire men like them?" he asked. "Because the law allows men like me to keep the world from breaking while the law thinks. You think slow is virtue. It is sometimes. It is also sometimes a child's coffin. I prevent those." Mara murmured, "He believes himself," and the contempt in it was pity made stern. Silas stepped closer to the headlight wash. "You hired men to snatch a child to get a signature. That's not preventing a coffin. That's threatening to nail it." Vale's eyes went colder in a way wealth knows how to do when it wants to be winter. "Give me the deed," he said, voice small and sharp now. "I will give you your daughter. You will go back to your hill. I will take my rock. The creek will continue to be wet and innocent and yours to look at while its rights belong to men who put it to use. Everyone sleeps. A radio bed." Shaved Head tilted. His jaw worked. "Boss," he said, mouth close to the mic. "Overwatch is dark." Trestle and Cut Bank both went quiet. "North Perimeter lost 2. Van 2 hasn't checked in." Vale's head turned slowly. "What did you say?" Shaved Head swallowed whatever story he had planned. "We're compromised on the edges." Vale looked back at Silas as if he had misplaced a file. "You brought help," he said. "I brought people you forgot were people," Silas said. "You can leave now, and we can pretend you didn't make a mistake you can't afford." For a moment, there was space in the night where a man like Dorian Vale could have become smaller and therefore larger. He could have said I was wrong and he would have become a legend of a different kind. He chose the legend he knew. He nodded at Shaved Head. "Take him," he said. Men moved from the brush as if the brush had decided to become men. 3 from the left, 2 from the right side sloppy because someone had lost a radio and hadn't told his feet. Mara stood and Hester stood and Rook stood, and the words "destroy" and "security team" became less about violence and more about competence. Silas stepped forward and let the caltrip chain fall from his shoulder. It snaked across the gravel with a clatter that felt like memory finding a groove. He kicked it under the lead man's boots and lifted. The man went up and then down, and the part of him that believed in invincibility made a sound like tin. Silas slid to the second, who had been watching Mara because she was new and a woman and men make the same mistake with new and women eternally. He took the second man's elbow and wrote his name in the air with it, then set it down wrong. The elbow remembered. Mara put the third down with a strike that looked like kindness if you didn't know where sternum meets history. Hester swung her farmer's wire in a loop and caught a fourth man's ankle, and because she had built fences, she knew how to apply tension until the leg laid itself down. Rook tossed the jammer like a salad bowl under the truck and clicked it thrice. The remote in Shaved Head's hand went briefly deaf, then dumb, then stupid. Silas walked the space like a man pacing off his property lines and making adjustments where surveyors had been lazy. He did not kill. He did not allow men to stand up a second time thinking they were the first to do so. He used the edge of his hand on a neck, a knee into a thigh, the grace of a pivot he had practiced in rooms with sandbags for walls and bad coffee in urns that leaked. He spoke once, "Stay down," and men who had never met him before decided he was telling the truth. Shaved Head came in last because leaders who think they are wolves like to follow long enough to arrive clean. He had a blade in his fist that knew secrets about arteries. Silas let him complete his first intention, 2 steps and a cut at air to make fear, and then kicked the remote out of his other hand with a snap of the toe that felt like punctuation. The remote skittered under the truck and died next to the jammer like a couple that had never met but had a lot in common. Shaved Head snarled, which was theater that men use when the next thing they want to do is less brave than the sound. He lunged. Silas stepped inside the blade and introduced his forehead to the man's nose in a way that two fathers had taught two sons to never escalate to. Something in the man's face decided it was time to retire. He crumpled into himself with a dignity that would return eventually if he did slow work with good people. Vale stood by the truck with his hands in his pockets, the oddest kind of stillness, the stillness of someone whose world has always arranged itself and is experiencing the physics of no. He watched his men lie down in the gravel like a field deciding to be fallow. He looked at Mara. "Traitors rarely prosper," he said, voice quiet. Mara tilted her head. "We're not traitors," she said. "We're your quality control, finally doing its job." Wren, wrapped in mylar, made a small involuntary sound, the squeak a child makes when a mouse chooses the wrong moment to be alive. Vale's head turned toward the bush and Silas moved in the same instant without deciding to. Mara moved with him. Hester lifted the wire and Rook snapped a cuff shut with a sound like yes. Silas lifted Wren out of the mylar and put her behind him in the van, between the two rear wheels, the ground still warm from a day of holding weight. "Stay," he whispered, and she stayed because orders sometimes save you from having to be brave. Police lights didn't arrive with a wail. They arrived with the quiet dignity of a sheriff who knows where to park to make paperwork easier later. Thad pulled up behind the truck, set his hat, and stepped into the turnout with his hands empty and the weight of a county in the way he walked. Two deputies slid out behind him, Uriah, eyes too wide and feet finding the ground fast, and Boyd, a man built of caution and rope. "Evening," Thad said to the night in general. "Mr. Vale." "Ms. Lemaine." He had seen Claire before he added her name. She stood to the side, half in shadow, eyes reflecting a kind of sadness that had the law's shape and a human shape together. "I hope to hell nobody here is hurt worse than pride." Vale smiled, but it was an automatic function, like a porch light turning on when a moth makes a decision. "Sheriff," he said. "We were in the middle of a lawful negotiation and were attacked." Thad's eyebrows went up so far his hat floated a quarter inch and settled back down. "Kidnapping is not a negotiation," he said. He nodded toward Wren where she sat between the van's wheels making her lips thin to keep the emotions from falling out. "You want to try that word again?" Claire stepped forward then, unexpectedly brave. "Sheriff," she said, "I attempted to call Judge Polson when Mr. Vale ordered the removal. Cell service jammed." She glanced at Rook, at the jammer that had made silence local. "We can call now." "Already did," Thad said. "He's awake and mad and signed. County order says nobody touches this ridge or this child's freedom without my signature and two other things you don't have." He turned to Silas. "You okay?" "I will be," Silas said, and meant it the way men mean it when they are speaking into the part of themselves that keeps the lights on. Uriah started cuffing men with a competence that had been purchased with the coin of his earlier fear. Boyd walked around the periphery and collected weapons with the lonely gentleness of a man who wants to return everything to the store and get a refund. Vale put his palms out as if beginning a new paragraph. "Sheriff, I came to correct a mistake my team made in approaching Mr. Rourke. A contractor exceeded instructions. I fired him this afternoon. I came personally to prevent further escalation. Your contractor's feet made prints on a sensor mat across Mr. Rourke's service road," Thad said. "Your contractor's friends cut power to a house with a child in it. Your contractor brought a van to a mile marker with a child in it. I'm having a crisis here trying to reconcile your sentence with my job." "Arrest me then," Vale said suddenly, with that peculiar martyrdom wealthy men practice when they know bail is a concept that likes them. "We'll litigate. In the meantime, you'll delay the evacuation of a hazard zone. If the share goes while you posture, that's on you." Amos Fielding stepped out from behind Thad like a man a canyon had sent as its lawyer. He carried his little notebook and wore an expression that was older than Vale's money. "I walked your shear," he said mildly. "It's as stable as your hair. The only thing that'll make it fail is someone pointing cameras at it till the ground gets embarrassed." Vale's mouth did a small involuntary twitch, a muscle that had been asked to carry too much brand too often. "Who are you?" Geologist, Amos said. Not the kind that flies on helicopters. Claire glanced at Amos and then at Vale. He's the county's man, she said quietly. He's not wrong. It was a gentle sentence, and it hurt. Vale turned that hurt into ice and pointed it. Claire, you're fired, he said, because punishing a woman is easier than overspending a man when you're built wrong. Claire did not go smaller. You don't have that power over me at this moment, she said. Right now this is Mr. Matters's county. Right now I am a witness. She raised her phone. And this conversation is recorded. Thad leaned back an inch and let air back into the world. Everyone stop making my deputy's pen run out of ink, he said. Here's how we're going to do this, Mr. Vale. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, unlawful use of electronic surveillance devices, and 17 county code violations I'm going to enjoy reading you. If that feels like too many words, you can wait in the car and I'll abbreviate. Vale opened his mouth. Closed it. Looked at Silas like he wanted to say something that would repair a version of the night where he was still central. He settled for quiet anger, a choice that would cost more later. Shaved head, face bloodied in dignity on a rope, laughed suddenly, a short bitter thing. Boss, he said to Vale, I told you the Marine was going to be a problem. Vale gave him a look that suggested he had never heard a subordinate finish a sentence in public before. Neil, he said, you've been dismissed. Neil smiled with a mouth that had lost count. So have you. He looked at Silas then. You don't know me, he said. You didn't see me. The plea in it surprised Silas and opened a space that had not been there a second earlier. Men are complicated even when they've done simple bad things. Silas didn't answer. He walked to Wren and picked her up and felt his heart decide it had been holding itself wrong all evening. Her hair smelled like laundry and creak in the banana shampoo she'd insisted on because the bottle had a picture of a monkey reading a book. She pressed her face to his neck and went loose with the kind of exhaustion children do when the drama finally lets go and leaves room for sleep. Let's go home, he told her. We have a post to fix in the morning. Thad's men finished the work that makes a story legal. They read rights. They collected devices. They took photographs of graphite on fingers and of a little black wristband blinking a lie. Claire gave Thad an email from her phone that contained something heavier than one night could hold, a thread of internal memos with subject lines like public safety narrative draft and acquisition pressure points. You could build a prison wing out of memos like that if judges remembered they were human first. Mara watched the truck doors close on men who had arrived as wolves and were leaving as tired dogs. She felt nothing like triumph, only the slow return of a world where choices lined up and asked to be made face to face. She turned to Silas. You kept your temper, she said. That's rare. I kept my daughter, he said. The rest is just post-production. Rook snorted. You talk like a man who edits his own radishes. Hester grinned. He does. And they're too spicy. Silas managed a smile and then let it go. He looked at Mara. Why'd you come? He asked. Not why you could. Why you did. Mara glanced at Wren. When I told Vale not to drill the creek, I went home and my little niece asked if we were going to hurt the fish. I told her no. I lied without meaning to. I'm useful at many things, lying like that is not one of them. Stay for coffee tomorrow, he said, the way men on ridges offer what they actually have. Bring your people. We'll see what the next day wants. It will want a lawyer, Claire said, stepping into their circle as if she had belonged the whole time. A good one. I'll make calls. She hesitated. I'm sorry. Silas nodded. You showed up, he said. That's rare. They walked up the road together, Thad and Boyd and Uriah shepherding cars and men, Amos already composing sentences with his pencil, Mara's team fading into trees the way a promise sometimes does, not because it breaks but because it waits. The stars did what stars do. Back at the cabin, the refrigerator hummed again because Boyd had cut the device out of the line and left it on the workbench with a yellow evidence tag like a trophy from a sport nobody wanted to play. The cedar post leaned a little, a reminder. Wren sat at the table and ate a piece of bread with honey like it was a ceremony the county had codified. "Do we have to move?" she asked. "No," Silas said, because he finally had the right to say it. "Not tonight. Not because a man said so." She nodded and her eyes got heavy and she slipped off the chair and onto his lap the way water slips over a stone. He carried her to bed and tucked the quilt around her shoulders. He watched her sleep for a minute because every father who still can should. Then he went outside and sat on the porch step where the shotgun had rested and watched the first hint of dawn decide it might exist. Mara stood at the bottom of the steps like a woman practicing leaving and finding she was not in a hurry. "You did well," she said. "I did what my kid forced me to do by existing," he said. "That's the only way I ever do well." She smiled. "Let that be your religion." The morning arrived on time. The geologist's paragraph became a court order. The court order became a pause. Reporters tried to drive up the county road and found the turnout blocked by a sign that said "Bridge out" because sometimes the easy truth is the right kind. Vail made bail before lunch, because of course he did. He said into microphones that he had come to prevent a tragedy. The memos said he had come to create one to prevent another, more expensive kind. The law began to chew with its slow, good teeth. Thad came by with paperwork and a smile he didn't make. "You're going to have a month without helicopters," he said. "After that, we'll see how stubborn money can be." "Money is a glacier," Silas said. "It carves. We plant trees." "You plant good," Thad said, and tipped his hat to Wren as she sat on the step with a wrench, helping Amos tighten something because he had told her it mattered and that was currency she took. For 2 days, the ridge rested. Silas cut a new post and Wren set the lead foil into the crack for weather seal with tiny fingers that took their time. Mara slept in the guest loft because she didn't pretend there was a safer place in the valley than the house she had helped keep safe. Hester and Rook moved around the perimeter like good gossip. Claire made calls, some returned. Amos wrote and revised and called the creek she like old farmers do because they know what feeds them and deserves pronouns. On the 3rd day, someone left a package at the gate. It was a paper grocery sack with a ribbon stolen from a different life. Inside, a USB drive, a typed letter, and a photograph of a young man in a sheriff's deputy uniform 20 years ago. The letter said, "He isn't what you think." "Neither am I, good luck." The signature was a name Silas had not learned because he had not asked, Neil Cade. Silas looked at the drive and thought of how wolves sometimes bring bones to the porch when they're trying to be dogs. He carried it inside and plugged it into an air-gapped laptop Amos had carried in a canvas bag that smelled like oil and tobacco and humility. The screen filled with files and dates and internal videos shot on phones by men who have forgotten that phones are also witnesses. "Claire," he called, and she came and looked and made the face of a lawyer who has found not just leverage but the fulcrum. "We can end this," she whispered. "Not today. But soon." "Endings are for songs," Amos said around his pencil. "What we get are harvests." That afternoon, Wren asked if they could go to the creek. They did. The trout held in their pool like librarians refusing to be rushed. Wren threw a leaf in and watched it spin. "Do we still have to be mad?" she asked. "Yes," Silas said. "But the kind of mad that learns how to build windmills." She nodded like she had been given a map instead of an order. "Then we need wire," she said, practical. "And a bike wheel." "We know a woman with wire," Silas said. "And a man with a barn." The phone rang that evening with an unknown number that was not a trap. It was Judge Polson, voice tired and kind. "Mr. Rourke," he said. "I read your daughter's statement. I read the memos. I read the geologist's letter twice. I want you to know something my robe doesn't get to say out loud very often. You were right to stand." "Thank you," Silas said, because a man has to let gratitude land even when he's still angry. "Don't leave the county for a few days," Polson added dryly. "The press will want to turn you into whatever makes the most clicks. Sheriff will help you say no." "No is my first language," Silas said. After dark, a helicopter passed high and didn't slow. Wren slept hard with a wrench under her pillow because she decided dreams should carry tools. Silas sat on the porch with Mara and listened to the ridge keep its promises. "How long does this kind of quiet last?" Mara asked. "As long as we keep making it," he said. "And as long as men like Vale keep learning there are places on the map that bite back." Mara nodded. "We'll be nearby," she said. "There are others like him. There are others like you." He looked at the caltrop chain on the bench and at the repaired post and at the mylar folded on the shelf like a ridiculous cape that had done something holy. "There's us," he said. "That's enough." In the weeks that followed, Apex Terra changed its name on paper and changed its spokespeople and tried to change the subject. The USB drive made introductions in rooms with microphones. A federal agency with 3 letters took an interest with the mild curiosity of a grizzly watching a picnic. Vale took a sabbatical to reflect, which is a word men like him use when they mean rebrand. Neil Cade disappeared into a part of the country where men wear ball caps that say things without writing anything. Claire joined a different firm and kept calling Amos sir, which he hated in public and loved in the privacy of his barn. The ridge held. The well rose a little, a courtesy from a hill that forgives slowly. The county posted a new sign at the foot of the service road, * no uninvited vehicles. "Yes, we * you, * Thad had it cut in metal because he believed in permanence as a public service. Uriah had it bolted with an enthusiasm that suggested he'd been waiting to put bolts into something righteous. On a Saturday, Wren and Silas and Mara and Hester and Rook built a windmill out of a bicycle wheel, a length of pipe, and 10 pieces of cedar that remembered being a post. It pumped water up to a barrel with the kind of stubborn rhythm that makes a life. When it spun for the first time, Wren shouted and the sound went down the creek and came back carrying a laugh from someone no one could see. "Mom would have liked this," Wren said, out of nowhere. Silas nodded, because grief sits at every table and sometimes asks for the honey. "She would have," he said. He put his hand on the wheel and felt the slight wobble and decided not to fix it. Imperfections help wind remember where to go. That night, the moon rose over a ridge that had learned a few new ways to say no. The cabin lights burned warm. The phone stayed face down. The rifle stayed in the closet. The man on the porch breathed like a man who had let the worst hour be what it was and chosen not to let it predict the next. When sleep finally took him, it did so gently, like a neighbor knocking and waiting for the invitation that distinguishes trespass from belonging. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.